Hey everybody, welcome to the Evening Reader. My name is Priscilla. Just took a drink of water right before I started filming. That's okay. I am here today to do the Worth Every Page, the Big Books tag. This is an original tag that was created by Shelly Swearingen, and Shelly tagged me. Thank you, Shelly. I will put Shelly's original video in the description box below. And let me read the prompt. It says, big books can be intimidating, but some are absolutely worth the time, the effort, and the wrist strain. In this tag, share 3 or more books around 800 pages or longer that you believe earned every single page. Whether they were emotionally sweeping, intellectually satisfying, or just wildly entertaining, these are chunksters that proved their worth. So this is really fun. I was excited and I had a hard time picking out my books. One of them, I think, it's kind of a spoiler because one of them, I put it in the description because I wanted to talk about Middlemarch, and it's one of my choices. And I just, because I just read it and I'm very excited about it. And so I thought this would be a great opportunity to combine my review of Middlemarch and this tag. But I have 2 other picks that maybe you weren't expecting. So let's just get on with it. So the first book is by one of my favorite authors. He's by the author who wrote my favorite book of all time, which is Lonesome Dove. This is my favorite book of all time, but this is not what I'm choosing for this video because I'm sure plenty of people are maybe going to choose this book. And also, this one's having a real moment on BookTube this year. Everybody is picking up Lonesome Dove and reading it or rereading it. And I'm so excited about that because I think it deserves every single bit of attention that it gets. But this is not the focus for today. This book was published in 1985. I'm going to go back in time a little bit, quite a bit, 15 years, to 1970, to Larry McMurtry's 4th novel, which is called Moving On. And this is the first book in what's known as Larry McMurtry's Houston series. And that series consists of 6 books. I read 3 of them. I read the first 3. I read Moving On. And then I've also read All My Friends Are Going to Be Strangers. And then Terms of Endearment. And then there are 3 more books after Terms of Endearment. Terms of Endearment, I'm trying to think of when this was published. I'll have to put it up on the screen. But the other 3 books are Somebody's Darling, Some Can Whistle, and The Evening Star. But all of the books in the Houston series revolve around a specific set of characters that include characters who are introduced in Moving On. Moving On's primary protagonist is Patsy Carpenter and her husband Jim. And Patsy does feature both in, I actually think she features in most of the books, I think maybe except for Somebody's Darling. I don't think that she is much in that. But Patsy Carpenter is married to a man named Jim. They're in their early 20s. It's set in the late 1960s. And it's a very unusual novel. As you can see, it's a big book. It's about 1,008 pages. So it's serious. This was Larry McMurtry's first big book. And he really, he loved 19th century novels. And I would say this is probably him trying to tackle those multi-character, multi-point of view novels that he loved so much, to try to do that himself, to try to take his world and take what he knew about the literature that he loved and, put those things together and tell an immersive story. And he really, in my mind, he succeeds. I think, if you talk to critics, if you talk to critics, if you listen to the critics, this is definitely not McMurtry's best book, but it is a really wonderful book, and it shows a lot of his strengths, especially in character building and in character relationships and in really sort of showing how people grow and change Uh, he really loved Patsy Carpenter. He thought that she was a terrific character. He was very surprised that a lot of women didn't particularly like Patsy, especially because she tends to cry a lot. But it does make sense in terms of the novel, and I can understand him defending his choice to have Patsy cry a lot. It's just part of her character. She's definitely not a like a weak or overly emotional character. Crying is just something that she does that helps her have an emotional release, and it makes a lot of sense. But apparently that bothered a lot of people. Anyway, Patsy and Jim are pretty much newlyweds. They're in their early 20s. They're both people, younger people of some means, so neither one of them necessarily like has to work or go out and do anything specific. They're kind of freewheeling, and they're freewheeling in a time when there's a lot of social upheaval. There's a lot of change going on, and they're both kind of trying to figure out who they are and what they're supposed to be and what their roles are. And it's interesting to have him focus on Patsy when he could have so easily focused on Jim. And Jim, when the book opens, Patsy is sitting in her car outside of a rodeo, and she's waiting for Jim because Jim has decided that he wants to be a photographer, and in particular, he wants to be a rodeo photographer. So she's waiting in the car, and she's reading a book, and she's eating a Hershey bar, and she meets these crazy rodeo characters. She meets a rodeo clown named Pete, and she also meets a cowboy who's, why is his name escaping me? Sonny. She meets a cowboy named Sonny. And she sort of forms a relationship with them, as she and Jim do, as they're traveling on the rodeo circuit. That's really much of the first part of the book. Eventually, Jim decides that he wants to go back to school to get his PhD, and they go back to Houston and they start their life in Houston. And there she meets another graduate student named Hank, and sort of becomes involved with him. And so it's really, Patsy is the center of the book, even though she's not always the character in the scenes, because it is a multi-point of view, multi-character narrative. But it always comes back to her, and it always comes back to her trying to sort of figure out what her life is going to be and how she's going to, I don't know, sort of manage and take on everything. What Jim is doing, what she's being a wife, becoming a mother, and what that means. And again, in a world that sort of seems to be topsy-turvy and things seem to be changing very quickly. I think, yeah, I really just love this because I think that one of the things that McMurtry is so good at doing is really taking what he knows and infusing, building a story around what he knows. And by that, I don't mean he does write what you know really well, but by that, I don't mean he doesn't look beyond the tip of his nose like a lot of writers do today. He really cares about writing rich characters. He's really not so much of a plot driven novelist. It was yesterday I was watching a video. Jennifer Jelinkova was talking about her favorite books of 2025 so far, and she was talking about reading a second book by an author that she had really loves, or I think it was a second book, maybe it was a third book by this author that she really loves. And this second book, she was naming it as a favorite, but she's like, but it might not really be the best book. And I totally get that. But what's so interesting and the point she made that was very cool that I liked was that when you love an author, sometimes reading their books where things aren't perfectly executed, where there are some bumps, where you can see sort of them trying to work things out or trying to develop something. That is exactly what's going on here. And I think that's why I love this so much. It may also be because I already knew some of the characters and I already was excited to see them because I had already read All My Friends Are Going to Be Strangers and Terms of Endearment. So those characters show up here. Like, Emma Horton is introduced in this book. Emma Horton is the daughter of Aurora Greenway. Those are the main characters of Terms of Endearment, which if you've read or seen the film, then yeah, you know. I think that I am repeating myself. I wouldn't be surprised, but that's okay if I am. Anyway, this is a chunkster. If you love Larry McMurtry, I wouldn't suggest starting here, and I wouldn't even necessarily suggest starting the Houston series with this book. I think that you could go ahead and read these two books, and then you could go to this one, or you could start with this one. It really doesn't matter. But you know, just remember, this is him. This is Larry McMurtry working towards becoming the Larry McMurtry that wrote Lonesome Dove, and I don't think that he could have written or been so successful at writing Lonesome Dove if he hadn't already been trying to tackle this sort of very big book that encompasses these characters and these relationships. So that's my first pick. The second book that I'm picking up for the worth every page tag here is Fayne by Anne Marie MacDonald. This book is 729 pages, so not quite, yeah, I'm kind of pushing the limits a little bit, but that's okay. I picked this book up earlier this year. This was fantastic. I read this for the Read Goods Challenge hosted by Ben Reads Good, because we were supposed to pick a book with Anne in the author or title name. This is a book about a young girl named Charlotte who lives on an estate called Fayne. Fayne is at the border of Scotland and England. They are on the Scotland side. Her father, the Baron, he's the Baron of Fayne. His name is Henry Bell. She's 12 years old when the book starts, and it's set in the 19th century, sometime in the late 19th century. And the book begins with her getting a tutor. And she has been sort of sequestered here on this estate alone with her father for most of her life because she has some mysterious condition that she does not understand, but she knows that it is why she has to sort of be kept away from the world. Her mother died in childbirth, and there was also an older brother who also died as an infant. And so it's just Charlotte and her father. And change comes to Fayne one day when her father hires a tutor to take on educating her. And it turns out that she's very intelligent and very precocious, but most of the knowledge that she has is pretty arcane and is based on the very, very, very old library that exists at Fayne. So she knows a lot about sort of like ancient texts and older science. She's read it all, but she doesn't know about anything really that's modern. And so her tutor, Mr. Margolo, sort of begins to introduce her to all of the new world of science and all of the happenings there. And she's very excited. And she gets this idea that she wants to go to Edinburgh and study at the university there and become a doctor. And then that thing happens that happens to every young girl. Charlotte becomes a woman, meaning that she gets her period. And suddenly overnight, Mr. Margolo is gone and her life changes almost irrevocably. She is no longer allowed to study. She can't go around Fayne dressed in, pants and, a tunic. She has to wear dresses. She has to learn to be a lady. And then she is forced to socialize. And this is how she meets her best friend, Gwen. This is book, actually, Charlotte's the main character, but it is a multi-point of view book, or it does go to other characters. It does tell the story. It goes back in time to tell the story of Charlotte's mother and how she came to be at Fayne and how her first child was born, and then also the story of Charlotte and the beginning of her existence as well. Eventually, Charlotte and her father do end up moving to Edinburgh. She believes that her father is taking her there so that she can sit for the entrance exam to the university. But in fact, there's something else entirely going on that has to do with Charlotte and also with a secret that Henry and his spinster sister, Charlotte's Aunt Clarissa, who lives at the family home in Edinburgh, are keeping from her. So that's really all I can say because if I say too much more, I might give things away. This is one of those books that has some interesting twists. They're very organic to the book, though. They are not like out of nowhere, oh my gosh, can you believe it twists. It builds very slowly. You probably will start to figure it out early on in the book what's going on, but Charlotte has no idea. And so it's a case where the reader can see what's happening, but Charlotte herself really does not know. She doesn't understand. And that lends a great deal of tension and suspense to the book of how is she going to figure this out and what is going to happen to her and what will be revealed to her or what will she have to discover on her own. And this book takes a look at all kinds of interesting things, the relationships between parents and children, um, queerness, sexuality, gender, but all in very sort of like organic and interesting ways. There's also a little bit, I guess, of what you could call magic or magic realism here. I think you could call it that, or maybe it's just more like magic and folklore. I'm not sure. But this is a fantastically atmospheric book, both when they're at Fayne and then when they're in Edinburgh. It just, MacDonald does a fantastic job of drawing the scene. She never does make anything feel ahistorical, even though she's dealing with very contemporary, timely topics. She very much manages to keep the story, you know, feeling really, like I said, organic, very real. It's not as if she's shoving something modern into something that is actually set in the late 19th century. And the things that happen to Charlotte and the reactions that she have, they feel just very genuine and very wonderful. There's also a great deal of humor. Charlotte's got a terrific wit. MacDonald herself as a writer has a terrific wit. And so you actually will find yourself possibly laughing out loud at this book or with this book. So I can't recommend this one highly enough. This is the only Anne-Marie MacDonald book that I have read, but I've heard that her other books are really fantastic and come highly recommended. Particularly Jess, a stalking Kafka, had talked about loving this book so much and loving this writer. So I will see if I can dig up. I think she has a video where she talks about Anne-Marie MacDonald. I'll see if I can dig it up, and if I find it, I will put it in the link. I'll put a link to it in the description box below. Okay, my third book is George Eliot's Middlemarch at 838 pages. Oh my gosh. I don't know how I made it this far in life without having read Middlemarch. It's amazing to me. I can't believe that I wasted all those years and when I could have read it and then I could have been rereading it every year. That's how much I loved this book. It's so fantastic. So this was published around 1870, and written in the late 1860s, 1870. But it's set in the 1830s in a village called Middlemarch, and it deals with the inhabitants of Middlemarch and just is it's so good. Probably the primary characters are Dorothea Brooke, who, when the book opens, lives with her sister Celia. They live with their uncle, Mr. Brooke, who is an estate owner, a landholder. He has interests in he's a dabbler. He's what you would call a dabbler. He dabbles in art collecting. He dabbles in travels. He dabbles in politics. Dorothea herself is a young woman in her early 20s. She's very serious minded, and what she wants more than anything is to be of service with her life in some form or fashion. And one of her hobbies, we learn as the book opens, for example, has been drawing plans for new housing for the tenant farmers um, on the land of an estate nearby. And there is Sir James Chettam, who owns a nearby estate, who is very interested not only in Dorothea's plans for the tenant housing, but also in Dorothea herself. But Dorothea finds him sort of fluffy and sort of just, not serious enough, and too much of, too much finery, and too wealthy, and maybe a little too good looking. And instead she sets her sights on a much older gentleman, uh, Mr. Casaubon, who is sort of a scholar and who is very serious minded, and who has been working on an ancient history tome. That's just the best way to put it, the easiest way to put it, that he's been working on for a very, very long time. And Dorothea just sees an opportunity possibly to marry Mr. Casaubon and to go live with him and to sort of become his pupil as well as his wife and his helpmeet, to help him finish his work that he's been laboring over, and to have a chance to sort of learn Greek and Latin, and to sort of just get the education that she's never been able to get, so that she can, she sees this as a purpose, as a great thing to be able to do, and hopefully also to do some of the same things for the tenant farmers who live on Mr. Casaubon's estate, of course. But it turns out that he's got a great situation there, and nobody really needs her help, including Mr. Casaubon. So it's very difficult for her. The other primary character in Middlemarch, although this is a multi-character, multi-third-person point of view book, these are the two primary characters. The second one is Tertius Lydgate, who is a doctor who is not from Middlemarch, but who has come to Middlemarch to set up a practice and to try to help the doctors there, and to set up a hospital there, and to help modernize the medical practice, because most of the doctors in Middlemarch are sort of the types who just give out a lot of tonics and a lot of prescriptions and who are not really practicing modern medicine. And Lydgate has studied in Paris, and he's familiar with some of the other progressive studies being done, or ways that they've been teaching in Scotland. And he really wants to sort of try to bear down on medical research, make new discoveries, and help to reform these medical practices in Middlemarch and make the hospital a success. There are multiple other characters. There are poor Lydgate. He really wants to live a life of the mind as well, but it turns out that he falls in love. He marries the daughter of Middlemarch's mayor, Rosamond Vincy. They could not be two people more at cross purposes. Oh, that's the thing. What George Eliot is able to do with characters and character building and relationships, and showing the difficulties in having these people who are coming together with very different motives and very different points of views, and trying to bring the other person around, or trying to rework in their own mind how the situation is, so that they can go on sort of living through these things day to day, that they can try to affect these situations or fix them. It's just fascinating. And then, of course, there's the bigger picture of Middlemarch that the other characters represent, and that the story as a whole represents, which is just, you know, the the development of class and of the middle class in England at the time, the religious reforms that are happening, the social reforms, the advancements in science, all of these things that were such great interest to George Eliot are on display in this book as well. It's so funny to me that I just want to address two things that I saw about this book. There were a couple of people on Instagram who I follow who I guess were reading this at the same time, because right around the time I finished it, they each posted a review, a short review, if you will, on Instagram, like, hey, I read this. And I just have to sort of dispute both of their reviews, because the first one said that Middlemarch is just basically it's just a soap opera. It's just a soap opera. It's a 19th century soap opera. And I just can't get with that. I think that that is such a dismissive thing to say about this book. And especially in the sense that, Eliot herself wrote a great deal, wrote about philosophy, wrote about science, wrote about lots of other areas. And she brings so much to bear in this book, as much as she can to move the story along. That to say that this is just, this just kind of reminds me of the general criticism that a lot of women writers get, even now, even today, that, well, it's just, it's mostly just domestic stuff and relationships. And so it's a soap opera. No, just because something deals with domestic situations and relationships and is written by a woman does not make it a soap opera. I just, I think about all of the things that are also going on in this book, how they're talking about the political reforms, how they're talking about the medical reforms, and how it really does sort of deal with the idea of this growing middle class. I don't know, unless it's just that person who had picked up this book was really just unaware of any sort of British history, or really, was unaware that, as I think maybe people can be, that there were these types of situations. I don't, these types of situations, I'm not really sure what just things like, the class situation and how difficult it was to move beyond your station, and how if you were middle class, if you wanted to move at all, or if you were lower class but you wanted to move to the middle class, and how, how the world was changing. I don't know, there's a great deal of social commentary in this book, because Eliot's looking back, right? She's in the 1860s, the late 1860s. She's in a different world than it was 30 years before, or 40 years before. The second weird thing that I saw somebody say about this book is that it was completely devoid of humor. So many of these tabs are just absolutely, I put them there because I was so astounded and so happily surprised by Eliot's wit. I mean, it is at times even like laugh out loud funny. And she writes with such dry humor. I'm going to read this little bit here. And this is Fred and Rosamund Vincy. Rosamund Vincy is the daughter, as I said, of the mayor. Fred is her brother. They are on their way to Stonecourt to see Mr. Featherstone. And as they approach, they ride up to the house, and Rosamund says, "Dear me," said Rosamund, "I hope none of my uncle's horrible relations are here." And Fred says, "They are, though. That is Mrs. Wall's gig. The last yellow gig left, I should think. When I see Mrs. Wall in it, I understand how yellow could have been worn for mourning. That gig seems to me more funereal than a hearse." I don't know why I find this so funny. "But then Mrs. Wall always has black crape on. How does she manage it, Rosie? Her friends can't always be dying." So there's just these little bits that help you learn about who these characters are. There's no character, no matter how small their role, because Mrs. Wall herself has really no other role in this book except to get laughed at by Fred Vincy. But he does it so well that we know exactly who Mrs. Wall is, the way that he presents her. And she just does this over and over and over again. And it's just so fantastic. I will admit that I was a little bit daunted at the idea of reading this book. I didn't realize that it was going to have so much humor. I didn't realize, I don't know. I did. I expected it for some reason to be dry, and I'm not sure now why I did. And I was also very concerned about not knowing the history. There are a lot of mentions about political and religious reforms in here that if you don't know much about that time period in Britain, there are notes at the end. At least I've got this is the Penguin Classics version. I'm sure that if you have a pretty good version, you could have like the Oxford Classics version, or, something that's going to have some end notes in it and have some information in it. It'll get you by. But I want to just, go. I was watching Katie Lumsden. I was watching her videos about her 10-year anniversary on BookTube. And she was talking about some of her favorite classics and about reading classics. And one of the things that she said that struck a note with me and also really helped me decide, yeah, okay, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to pick up Middlemarch. I need to stop thinking that I have to have some kind of background, or I need to do something else first before I can approach this book. And she said, there are going to be things you don't get. There are just going to be things that you don't understand, and you just have to go on and go past them. But especially when you have a writer like Eliot, who is so good at developing characters and so good at showing relationships. And I would say, in a weird way, this book is actually quite modern in its sensibility in terms of how these characters are interacting and what they're trying to do. It doesn't feel like archaic at all. So I think you can just read past it. Stop and Google it when you feel like it, if you feel like you want some more background information. But you will get through it, and it will not slow you down. And I don't think that it will. Knowing those things may enrich your experience a bit, but I really think that the main thing here is the characters and the relationships and the world of Middlemarch itself. And it feels very universal, and I really think it's fantastic. So I cannot recommend this highly enough. I can't wait to reread this book. I love it. So, all right. I think this has gone on long enough especially for a book tag. But, it's a book tag / review, I guess. If I count Middlemarch, it's my review of Middlemarch for you. Because I know some of you said that you were thinking about picking it up as well. And so I hope that this encourages you to do so. I hope that you also maybe decide to take a risk on one of these other books. A chance. An opportunity. Let me know in the comments if you think that you might want to pick up any of these, or if you have read any of these and really enjoyed them. And I will look forward to hearing from you. I hope that you are doing well and taking care of yourself, and I will see you again in the next one. Okay, bye.